So I'll call this October 2021 meeting of HCDC to order. And we'll start with a consideration of our meeting minutes from September. Any comments or corrections? Then is anyone in the mood to make a motion?
So moved.
Second.
It was Becky and Marianne?
No, actually, I didn't this time. Who seconded?
I seconded.
Oh, Marianne and Megan.
I just had my, Lauren Bacall thing going.
With the masks, I have a hard time telling exactly who it is who's
God,
speaking.
I don't have my mask.
Oh, you don't
on.
have a mask
Do we have any mask here?
I don't think I have
I'll
one.
run out to my
Sometimes
car. I know,
Barry.
I think I have a disposable. I'm sorry.
I might have one in my car, too. I probably have one in my car, too.
I'll just have to be absent.
Benny.
Oh, we'll go ahead and take the vote on the meeting minutes. It's unlikely to be a controversial vote. All in favor, say aye.
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 Any opposed? The meeting minutes pass. We'll take public comment of items not on the agenda. First, I thought you had a public comment of an item not on the agenda. None. It's been a while since we've had none. We'll move to item 4, unsuccessful and delayed projects. I believe what we have here is a status report from Successful Living, who we heard from last month. And we put a couple of, what would you call them, criteria requests that we were asking for updates on. I know that there was the leasing rate of a project, and we discussed rental permits. I don't, Caleb, you may have listed even there may have been a third item that I'm not forgetting, or that I am forgetting.
I was mostly curious about seeing that rental occupancy and what it was at and what the progress had looked like.
So do we have someone from Successful Living? All right, come on up. I suppose is this the best seat?
There's this one, or I left a couple down here too, whatever is.
Wherever you guys want, I don't care. This works, if you don't mind. Thank you. All right, do you have a question, or do you want me to just give an update?
I think we'll just start with the update, and then we can have Q&A if people have questions.
Sure thing. So what I read in the minutes was that you guys had concerns about a few things. One is just the vacancy rate or the occupancy of the properties that we have. And we've been tracking it and sending the reports in monthly since May. And we have shown some improvement since, and we've continued to do so. Our vacancy rate is down to 10 currently. We're going to be due to give another report at the end of this month, or first of the month. And we're on trend to continue to maintain that improvement. There's always some things in flux, so I can't really say right now, but right now we still have improvement from that 10, I think. We have a couple tentative that might move out for certain personal reasons, but so the occupancy has continued to improve. Other things that were noted are the Hickory Court, getting the period of affordability started, which we did do that earlier this month. And so that's satisfied, and we're still moving in additional residents as well. So that was satisfied October 4th. For the property at 1340 Hollywood, it was noted that the rental permit wasn't attained, that we had, as you guys I think read and are aware, that we had issues with contractors and such, which delayed things pretty significantly. We got those things rectified and addressed. We were able to submit and get approval for our rental permit at 1340 Hollywood on the 6th of October. So that's satisfied. We also have 3 residents pending to move in. We're looking at about November 1st, I think, for that to occur. So I think we've satisfied everything that was asked for, and maybe even then some. So any questions so far in status? We also had Brianna come out here to our office, and we had a good visit. So for our annual on-site monitoring report.
Well, I don't recall offhand what the vacancy, exactly what the vacancy rate was before, but it was quite a bit higher than 10%, right? I mean,
It's more than 10%. We have 10 units open, is what
10 units, okay.
So
okay.
what's the percentage? Does 10 represent what percentage then?
we have 41 units, so it's 10 out of that.
24%, I had to check.
Pardon?
It's 24%, I had to check too.
And I think I remember it hovering in the high 20s, low 30s before, so that is down, I think about 5%.
Right. Any questions, or is there anything else people need to report on, I guess?
Well, now that I'm thinking of it, I do remember one other item that we had discussed, but we didn't expect progress on in 1 month, was the issue of seeking the ability to take voucher recipients, I believe, was the other topic that came up.
Yeah, we were looking into that. We never, I mean, Brianna sent us some information too. We've been in contact with multiple people at the city, but we haven't really gotten to the point where we've been able to utilize somebody with a voucher at this point. But it's something we're definitely interested in pursuing. Because that was one of the barriers that we've had basically throughout COVID, is that our usual referral sources and our usual sources that would assist with rent basically dried up or changed their approaches, or things happened, so it wasn't utilizable. But we've, fortunately, timing-wise, maybe with some of it, but in the last few months, we've been starting to see a thaw in things and a definite improvement in the referrals that we have. So that has made all the difference.
And if anyone else has any questions or input.
Actually, I do have a question, and I apologize if this was covered in the last meeting. I wasn't able to attend, and I'm kind of scanning through the notes furiously. Is some of the issue, or are you having any issues with the vacancies because of staffing? A need for staffing?
That's a factor, but it's not the reason.
Okay.
It's really within the referrals. We've been able to cover everything, so that's not really been a mitigating factor, I would say. And more recently, I mean, it's not. We'd like to have more staff for sure, but we're in okay shape at this point.
And then foreseeing if you were to get more units with that stretch, I mean, at what point are you kind of concerned about the ratio of staffing to units?
I guess with the current properties we have, we don't really have any concerns. We have plans. I mean, we have things in place. We have people hired and trained or in training. So, and we're still continuing to do some more hiring because we want to flesh out more, but we have enough to do the coverage that we feel is required.
Thanks.
Sure. And maybe I can speak to the kind of what was sort of in question too, is the down payment funds, the $90,010, I think was what's still left over. I don't know if you want me to comment on that, but so I mentioned in the report I sent in on that marketing report that we could and we have pursued by purchasing houses in the latter half of the fiscal year, which and done so successfully as well. This is a really wacky housing market, as you guys know, and we had looked at a couple earlier, but they go fast, they go high, et cetera. So, but I think we do have formally till June 30th to expend those funds, so I don't think that there's any like major pressure as far as that goes. So anyway, our plan was, I guess, according to what HCDC is asked, is to have reports basically this month and next month and see where it goes from there. But my intention would be to pursue seeking houses in December if that would be approved, I guess, by the HCDC.
The staff who were here last month indicated that changes in funding coming through ECR had a big impact on your ability to find individuals who had income to move into those houses. Is that going to be an ongoing factor going forward?
For that source, yes. So basically what happened was last year, July, they changed their rules as far as who could qualify for the housing assistance, and that was a main source for us, and that's basically just changed. I've talked to the regional executive director on more than one occasion on that, but that's not going to change, basically. They are doing other things, but with that specific rule, I guess I'll say, or policy, they aren't going to change that. We found other kind of sources to help with too. So it has helped us kind of grow and kind of think outside the box a little bit more. So moving forward, I think we've learned to live with with the change.
Any other questions? I do have a brief question about our agenda. Are we inviting an in-person report next month, or are we inviting a report to staff?
It's really up to you guys.
Can you repeat the question?
Well, our agenda just says that the agency will be invited to provide a November report, and I did not know if that was intended to just be a report to Brianna or a report to us. Sounds like we can decide.
I can always put it in the packet for you if you want to do a written report or either way.
And it's just an update. I don't have a problem with it just being to Brianna to us.
I mean, I'd like to see the report in some form in the packet, but I would be fine with it being in that manner.
So what would you have a detail of what you wanted in the report? Was it kind of the same topics that we talked tonight, or is there something else? Because we do provide like the occupancy report monthly and things like that, but.
Well, the main thing I would be personally interested in is the occupancy and vacancy issue, and if that's in the report that already goes to Brianna, then that would be fine with me. I mean,
Do we want to see any marketing efforts? We're talking about moving forward, correct?
right?
Yeah.
I think we would want to know ahead of the next funding round if there was going to be a discussion about recapturing funds, or if you want to address that prior to that funding round. If there's a discussion about it, I don't know if Roger would want to attend the meeting or if we're just looking for a progress report.
I think if there were a discussion about recapturing funds, we'd want to invite him back in person, though. Though, of course, we would have to decide as a commission if we wanted to have that sort of discussion. And I wasn't planning to propose it.
I'm sorry, repeat that.
I was going to say, I wasn't really planning to propose to have a recapture discussion, but we could propose that if we wanted to.
Well, I guess I might want to know from the city, they've got 20 or 10 units vacant yet. When, was it Brianna, did you meet with them? Did you set some goals in terms of, what does full occupancy mean, and a timeline for that? Did you do any of that?
So we can't really underwrite a home project until the vacancy is at a reasonable rate, meaning like 5 to 10%.
Okay.
So that's kind of the benchmark of what we need. So that was our question to the commission. Do you want to keep the funds with Successful Living and allow them time to improve the vacancy rate, or do we need to have the discussion of a potential recapture before the next funding round? So that's the direction we're looking for.
5 to 10% vacancy rate would mean what?
2 or 3, I think.
A
2 or 3
couple of units
right?
open? So that would mean 8 out of your 10 would have to be rented or occupied by what timeline? So we'd set a timeline for them, and if they didn't meet that, then we would consider the recapture of the funds. I'm comfortable with that.
That was my question, really, is when you say we need to determine before the next funding round, when is the next funding round?
I think the last time we talked about it, we were looking for direction before we approved the materials, in November, I think. And then the funding round opens in December and runs through January.
So we really do need to make a decision. At that point, I was thinking funding round was next spring. So honestly, I was thinking, they've got some time.
Yeah.
10 units is not going to be easy to fill
Yeah.
right now, especially if you're not taking HCV or emergency housing vouchers.
Not yet.
I think without a doubt, in that case, I think we would want to have that hard discussion at the next meeting and make a decision on whether to recapture, with the understanding that, obviously when vacancy rates get better, a future funding round, Successful Living can absolutely come back and ask for funds. Again, you know, but, I mean, if we can't underwrite it, it's pointless to keep the funds out there, right? If it's not gonna be an approved project and the funds aren't gonna be approved for it, then we should have the hard discussion next month. You know, if you guys still are at 10% or more vacant, or 25%, I'm sorry, 25%.
Might be about that.
Somewhere in there. Yeah, that's right, Becky's right. I mean, if that's the timeline, then yeah, I think we do have to have that discussion in person and have you come back and have that vote on the agenda for next month to, you know, pull those funds and reuse them in December when we start looking at other candidates who could use those funds maybe in a quicker, more, you know, more imminent way. So
I guess I'd like to add that by HUD rules, we should have till June 30th to spend these funds, not till the next funding round, which is December. So I get that the HUD fund is that you want to have it together, but HUD rules say we do have that much time, 8 months or so.
And essentially what you're looking for would be a reduction of vacancy from 10 units to 2 to 3 units by next month.
I mean, there's nothing to say that you can't leave the funds in the project, but it would just be with the understanding that that money would be, you know, waiting, pending that vacancy rate to be able to move forward.
So, but when he's talking about, I mean, is there a HUD rule we run into if we recapture funds, whereas HUD is saying that they have until next year to actually perfect those funds?
Here, don't we?
The home.
Yeah.
So home funds you have longer than CDBG funds.
There's usually a 2-year commitment deadline from HUD, but that's waived at the moment.
And then they need a address outlined by that time frame. I'm unclear on the specific timeline.
Is that something you guys can clarify? And if it is an issue where we can't pull those funds due to an outstanding HUD requirement on their behalf, then we just set it off. But if not, then we do, I mean, you guys can report to us and say, yeah, we can go ahead and have that discussion next month.
I don't think the requirement is that they need a certain period of time to spend the funds. I don't think that's it, but we can look into that and clarify.
Yeah, I think on our end, the issue is the issue with December is that we want to know ahead of the funding round whether we have more funds to allocate to other projects. It's not a hard and fast deadline that we need to deal with next month. It's just if we wanted to recapture those funds and give them out in the next funding round, it'd have to be dealt with next month.
But let me clarify, are you saying that HUD says that we can't recapture those funds?
I'm not saying that. I'm saying that we are legally allowed until June 30th to spend those funds. That's just what we have. As far as trying to recapture that, I guess I don't see an urgency to do it now versus other than the funding round, because there'll be another funding round next year for like April or something like that, probably, I'm going to guess, in that neighborhood. So I don't see why it needs to be 8 months ahead.
So I'm confused, and I'm sorry if it's because I'm not connecting here, but it's, right now we're considering this it's listed, labeled as an unsuccessful project, correct?
Delayed.
And why is it labeled, it must be past some deadline, so can you go through the deadline quickly again?
These were FY21 funds, and the reason we brought it to the commission as a part of that policy is there's a number of risk factors with the policy, or not with the policy, but with the projects. So vacancy, and then some of the other issues that were listed in the last packet, if you remember in that memo.
Right, I do.
The rental permit, like the first piece of this FY21 project, that Hollywood house that just got a rental permit hasn't been leased up yet. So when we review projects, we see all those items as risk factors.
So more like a risk of failure to complete the project, not so much that it's overdue at this point, but risk factors.
Like, for example, that Hickory project that finally leased up was 2 months shy of having to have funds repaid to HUD. So for us, that becomes a kind of a pressure point of trying to move the projects along.
Okay.
The next, but as you just mentioned, the next funding round would be April. After this next one, there'll be another one in April. Is that correct?
Typically, we do one funding round a year.
Oh, okay.
The applications will go out in December and be due in January, but you guys won't give your recommendation until probably March.
Okay.
And then, so it's a process.
So if at that point, I guess my statement is if we recapture those funds, and those funds are available, and January, February comes around, there's nothing stopping Successful Living from reapplying for those funds at a point when their occupancies are back up. Right? I mean, we could get those funds back. Successful Living could go back in February or whatever, that time period for that March round and say, we're back to only having a couple vacancies, we'd like to re-request those funds. I mean, it would be our decision, obviously, to do that.
But they would have to be back in the applicant pool for everybody else. I mean, be the same.
Yeah, they would retain eligibility for future
Right.
funding rounds, yes.
Well, I would like to highlight also that we've utilized home funds with a total of 10 houses successfully overall. I mean, this is a patch which I think we can't deny it was been a really uniquely challenging last year and a half, and we definitely suffered in a lot of ways, and I think occupancy was one of those. And also the population we often serve is one that has a lot more transiency. I think their AMI is closer to 15% on average what we serve. That kind of indicates that we're taking some of the harder cases of or persons who have more challenges, I guess, basically, as far as residency and staying in one place, which we see a lot of, and you aren't going to see with an average landlord. So I would hope that you guys have a little understanding of discretion as far as those persons that are occupying our houses versus the typical landlord, perhaps. So those are the challenges we have, because we can bring in, say, 10 people, but we might lose 3 or 4 or 5 in that period too, just due to, we had one last month that had a parole violation, nothing we could do about it. So another one went to the hospital, with significant mental health issues. I mean, there's things that are beyond our control to contain. So, but I think we've been showing pretty solid diligence in the last at least month plus. We've satisfied everything that was asked, I think, from last month to this point, and we're continuing so. So I would really prefer not to have to recapture the funds and then re-ask for them, because that's a large process that is pretty involved, frankly, for a provider. So, and I think we've shown a history of utilizing the funds very well, and I think this $100,000 is still well put with us.
And what are we talking about, what's the number?
$99,010.
10, yeah,
And Brianna,
and $10.
Brianna, could you speak a little bit to when the city would have to send money back to HUD? What that timeline looks like?
I think that's more of a city, can you speak to that, Erica? I think it is.
I don't know that we'd have to would we have to return them to HUD for this project, or is it all grouped together in one project?
Yes.
And if we leave it with Successful Living and they're not successful, they pay the city back that $99.
There's a lot of variables with it. Like, let's say they buy a house and they couldn't lease the units, then there's a possibility of having to repay for the units if they're still vacant. There's the possibility of them leasing up and then going vacant. Like, there's a project, a federally funded project right now that's been vacant for over a year. So there's just a lot of unknowns and variables in it. I think typically, isn't it like 4 years that we have to spend our whole grant?
Yeah, so for this particular project, I think if they weren't able to proceed within the 2-year home allocation deadline, we'd probably amend the agreement and just go with that one that you've already done. And then, but Brianna's talking about other vacant projects that need to meet specific home. So when they acquire their property, they have so long to lease up that property. And if they don't do it within a certain timeline, then the funds have to be repaid to HUD. So what we're working on right now is making sure that they're able to lease those up and not have to trigger those HUD deadlines.
And historically, has Successful Living ever had a problem in following them? Have we ever had a
If not had to repay, you haven't had to repay any.
Never.
Yeah, we just got with the Hickory one, it was very close.
Yeah, that was concerning for sure, but that's satisfied. And I mean,
do you guys keep an escrow account in place to pay back those funds?
we have funds. I do also want to highlight that the only deadline we missed was that 6 month for the 1340 Hollywood, as far as, not meeting that, and that was a 6 month, and the HUD does allow 18 months total if needed, and we're due to, within, let's just say by the end of the month or early next month, we'll have people moving in there, so that should be taken care of for there. And beyond that, the only next deadline will be next year sometime.
Well, it seems to me like we do need a report in November,
I agree with that.
and then we make a decision then.
Yeah.
And the decision would be recapture or revisit closer to June 30th, I guess, right?
Well, if we don't recapture, then that would be the other option for successful living, correct?
Right.
I guess I'd like to know what the ask is for the next month. I mean, are we, because I think I've had discussions before that, about the occupancy, that 95% is kind of unrealistic for our population. I get where HUD is at and such, but I thought we would have a little more flexibility or leniency as far as that goes. I thought was what I had heard, but I'd never heard a number. There was nothing discussed on that. But I think there's also, to be aware that there is progress and movement in the right direction, and a new agency is going to take a year or whatever to fill those, number of rooms as well. If you go through the whole process and such.
And I will agree, I mean, I would agree with you, 5% vacancy is a crazy number to try to reach in Iowa City's four-bill market period right now. I mean, I don't think 10% is a crazy number to look for. I don't think 10% is a crazy number for the city to expect with an investment.
It gets hard to,
$9,000, but.
I mean, when you're talking about 41 units, it gets hard to sort of distinguish 5 and 10%. We were just talking about the distinction between 2 units and 4 units here. So I kind of do think we need to set something a little bit concrete, but I don't think I'd be very surprised if you came back here next month and told us you only had 2 vacancies. So I don't know if that would be so we need to set something, and if it's that, we might as well just vote to recapture now. So I don't think it can be 2 units.
And once again, my follow-up questions are, I don't think we are looking at a real big issue of risk here. I mean, it is a long-standing, obviously they've done enough projects with the city and have followed through with them. I think the question is, what do we consider as a commission happy movement forward? Being in the business, in a month it would, even to reduce your occupancy, to reduce vacancy by 50%, to go from, from 10 to 5 would be tough, right? To have qualified applicants, but 33%, a third of those occupancies a third of those vacancies to be occupied, or at least to have a lease in place, or, I would be comfortable with that being positive movement forward in a month, and then at that point I wouldn't feel the need to push further for recouping. But in a month, if a month from now it's like, we've only got 1, well, that's a different story, because then we are still looking at 9 more months at 1 a month, right? If we can do a third, that puts us in the position that we know by the time next June comes around, and theoretically, we're on that right path and moving forward towards having the project complete in the time frame. So, that's kind of where I'm at. Maybe a report, and if occupancies are down to 7, or vacancies are down to 7 by next month, I'm comfortable with letting it push forward, but if not, then we come back and have the hard conversation of pulling, unless somebody thinks 6 or 5 or 8 or whatever number is better. I'm throwing 7 out.
I would take 7 as evidence of good progress. I don't know.
Do you have potential tenants that you're looking at right now that might help you reach that?
Oh yeah, we have I think 2, if not 3, very probables to fill our Hollywood property on November 1st or so, or shortly thereafter. So hopefully, again, there might be attrition, so that's going to be part of that factor. So we might have to fill 6 and lose 3 or something like that.
So if we get a report in November, then that gives the city time to figure out how much money is going to be available for the next round that would come out in December with applications due in January.
The thought seemed to be that if we had a decision one way or the other on recapture by November, that would give plenty of time to know the amount of funding available, right?
All right.
I have on the note here, we have 18-month grace period before we repay to HUD any funds. How far we are from this deadline?
The most recent one would be the Hollywood project, and I think we're at 6 months with that. And now they have a rental permit, and it sounds like there's potential tenants going up. So about a year out from the 18-month deadline.
I think we have a lot of time before talking about recapturing the fund, because we have 1 year left. This correct?
For the Hollywood project, yes. But there's two other acquisition projects in the FY21 project, so there's gonna be 3 homes total. So our question for the commission was, should we allow those other 2 homes to go forward? Or should we put the remaining money into something that might proceed in the more immediate future? So it's up to the commission.
Can I add a little clarification on that? So we would have till June 30th to purchase 2 houses. And then we'd have, not that we would want to use it, but we'd have 18 months to occupy them. But we'd like to do it in 6 months to have, that's kind of the issue we have with the current Hercules project, is that we weren't able to satisfy the first 6 months. But, so then we had to do the marketing report. And so now we're satisfied with that, so we don't have to bother with that sort of thing anymore. But really, that's kind of the timeline if you want to look at the full HUD allowance. But again, we don't want to wait that long. We just had various situations that prevented us from filling the rooms like we'd like to.
When you were talking about a lot of your feeds, from your leading feeds from where you're getting your tenants from,
Yeah.
that kind of, are you seeing an update? I'm guessing, I do know like Shelter House, for example, is seeing a lot of people who are going through the FED process now that the moratorium is over. They're seeing a lot more of those people filtering back. Do you get leads from them? Who are you getting leads from? Are you getting from Veterans Affairs over in Coralville? Or?
Well, I guess currently we have what we call our funder referral sources, which are they're called integrated health homes. We're managed care organizations, which oversee all the human service stuff, and they give us most of our referrals. We get some from the University of Iowa. We get some from the Department of Corrections. Shelter House goes through the funder sources, but they don't come to us directly. But we have multiple sources that we have, and to answer your question, they've improved as far as the amount that we're receiving as far as referrals. When it started, go ahead.
So are most of your tenants SSI tenants then?
They're all Medicaid, pretty much.
So I'd make the motion that we get a report from Brianna next month. If there are more than 7 vacancies still remaining, that we do put it on the agenda to have a discussion of recapturing funds. If it is 7 or less, then we just let the issue die and we'll look at it again in June.
I was actually going to ask a process question. Do you need a motion on this, or are you looking for commission advice? I mean, obviously we.
So that was my motion.
So you're asking for an in-person report next month, or a written report next month, where we'll use reduction of vacancies from 10 to 7 as a standard for good progress.
Yes.
I'll second that. All in favor, say aye.
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 Any opposed?
Sorry, I took your mic.
I was told I generally don't need it.
All right, I think that's it.
Thanks,
All
Roger.
right. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you. And we'll move on to our FY22 mid-year funding requests. And I suppose we can raise a number of issues and discuss this in a number of different orders, but I thought that we would start by looking at any issues we might have with scores and rankings first, and then move on to discussion of funding allocation. And in approaching this, what I plan to do is look at all of our scores and use major differences as, I think as we often do, as an opportunity for discussion, or where we might notice any unclarities or ambiguities, but I didn't really see that many major differences in our scores. They were similar, and at least on the individual questions where I saw major differences in range, they were on the questions I didn't expect there to be differences in range. So that was kind of interesting. So on really almost the only differences we saw were on the question of, does the project leverage other financial resources, or what primary percent of median income persons are targeted? And I think, at least by intent, those are supposed to be objective questions that have the same answer. So that's I know that, I think Becky, you in particular had talked about maybe looking into rubric revisions in the future. That might be one area.
I'm sorry, looking into what?
Maybe revisions to the rubric or refinements of the rubric in
Right.
the future, and that might be one area. And in thinking about this, I think where some of the ambiguities came from, at least on what percent of median income people are targeted, is that some projects targeted multiple median income ranges, and I think that maybe we handled that differently. I think maybe some of us averaged it, some of us took the higher or the lower, so that might be one area. And the other one is about leveraging other financial resources. I think that, well, some of the projects leveraged internal resources, and some of the projects applied for but had not yet received funding. And I think maybe we handled some of those issues differently. So I think that might be where some of that comes from.
Is there an expectation with this city in terms of what percentage should be leveraged elsewhere? I mean, whether that's, I don't think there's a difference if an organization uses its own funds, could have some sort of designated funds available for that, or they seek other funding, whether it's through fundraising dollars or grants or something. But is there an expectation of how much, if they're asked, let's use $100,000, is it 25% at the minimum should be leveraging other funds? Because this was a difficult one for me, because if you compared an agency like Shelter House, I actually, somewhere at home I have the percent, I worked out the percentages. Maybe they were asking for 5 or 6% of their total project. That's my memory, and it's not very good these days. But other organizations were primarily not leveraging a lot of extra money. So that was a question that I had.
Isn't it in their application guide?
I think so. I feel like we recommend or suggest.
I mean, like 25%. I'm trying to look it up right now.
Yeah, this has been, ever since I've been on the commission, a question, and or up for a difference of perspective. Does a lack of leveraging, or I don't mean it in a value way, but does a lack of leveraging additional funds indicate strength or weakness? Or does it indicate that much more need for the monies, the application here? So, I mean, there's a lot of different ways to look at this, and I know that the city has recommended on balance that there be more evidence of sort of that shared shared ways of obtaining money. But it's always still been a question to me about, is that the proper way to look at it? Because in some ways you can argue that if those relationships and those ties to places that have, additional funding sources, well then perhaps, how does that fit with places that don't have those resources? So it's a question that has arisen, I think, every year since I've been on this, and we've discussed this particular part of the rubric. So it's both a point of interest and a point of pain.
But we're discussing it in a different way this time, which is that our scores were very different on the question, which is was kind of a surprise.
So, and I think this year, this one is extremely to what Megan was talking about, which is, like, I gave the city of Iowa City and Green State and the city of Iowa State down payment assistance 25s, right? Of course, they have all the leverage in the world. I mean, the city has tax funds, has other sources of income, can take stuff. And the Green State Development, I mean, they're literally working with the bank. I mean, with the, so in that case, I mean, even though the leverage was huge, right? They've absolutely got all this ability to give other assistance. I don't feel that that makes it a more worthy project in any way than Shelter House or Housing Fellowship or Unlimited Abilities, who obviously don't have that kind of pocket available to them and may not have the same amount of partnership resources. And so it was weird because I looked at it as a very objective, score, right? I mean, who has a pocket full of money to the side that they can borrow? Who's got 50% of their project funded from someplace else? But it was a tough one subjectively because it didn't really speak to, I guess, the value or worth of the project as far as what I felt like some of the funding. I mean, I know the city of Iowa City and Green State I had a really hard time with from a standpoint of, and I meant to ask this question to Brianna, which is, you know, the people who do the down payments, are they getting a loan through Green State as well? Right, so Green State obviously has a vested interest in collecting the interest payments for those 20 and 30-year loans down the road. I mean, you know, it's hard to believe that even if we didn't give this down payment assistance, that somebody like Green State can't come up with $50,000 or $75,000 on their own to put towards, you know, 8 homes at 20, 30-year mortgages making, you know, even, I don't know what their rates are going to be. I mean, 7%, 8%. So, you know, I think I was one of the weird ones where, like, everything else was really high on that, but I definitely scored lower on the more subjective stuff I could score on because of the fact I was trying to offset that hard 25 that I felt they absolutely had for the financial assistance thing. So I don't know.
See, and my perspective is, if we're not going to, you know, if we're going to say some organizations are going to give a pass to because, you know, they'd have a hard time, you know, matching it, let's not have it on there, or we have a hard cut. I mean, you have to have some rationale for a score, and that's what applicants are expecting. Why did I get this score? And if we can't tell them why, gut instinct, I guessed, you know, we didn't follow rules. That's what's really frustrating to an applicant. So if it is 25% and they don't have that 25%, it should be a 0 in that box. If that's what we're requiring, 25%. That's how I feel, and I think that's what applicants are expecting too, is that we have some rationale for our scoring.
Well, I think it's difficult to say that a certain applicant has to meet a certain percentage of leveraging funds, because I think you have to consider the whole thing. I think you have to consider the population that they're serving, the income levels of the population that they're serving, how the rents or the mortgage and all of that's going to be paid. I think that's really difficult.
Then take it out.
In my experience, the sort of industry standard is that $1 of public funding to housing, affordable housing, would leverage about $7 of other sources, whether that's other public sources or private sources. And I would think that all of these applicants have banking relationships, Kyle.
No.
I mean,
right, but the bank isn't on. The bank isn't on it. I mean, Shelter House isn't. I mean, Shelter House's clients aren't putting. They're not putting their clients in touch with Green State Credit Union to get loans that they're going to pay. You know, that they're going to pay on for 20, 30 years. I mean, like I said, this is a weird one where. I mean, that one is just one of those things where
I'm talking about the whole process.
Right.
Not just Green State.
Right. I was just saying in this example, this is the one weird one that kind of popped out to me this year. So
I think here we're talking about per the application. So they're asking for $100,000. How much are they asking for us, and what other financial, whatever other funding have they leveraged? And if we shouldn't be asking that, then let's not ask it. Mm-hmm. because I think what gets into difficulty is the way we're scoring when we don't understand how we should be scoring. Then it skews. It might throw what might otherwise be a first place applicant into third place. So and I think those rankings should matter also. That's how I feel. If we can't identify, they should be scored like this. There was another one like the primary percent of medium income targeted. I kind of created even an expanded scale so that if somebody fell in the middle of, do I give them 5 points, do I give them 15 points, because I wanted to be fair. I wanted to be able to go back to something and say, this is why I gave you 12 on this, because you weren't quite as good as the other.
Yeah, I would agree that's something that I do as well. I think that to circle back to the original point about is it a lot of people who are sort of buying in and providing funding versus, someone who only has, 2 strong partners, right? I think that the guidelines have shown this is how you're supposed to score it. So, I'm just kind of putting a little bit of a caveat of we're not just throwing darts at the board. We are adhering to the rubric. I take your point that certainly for the applicants, we want to have it clear and we want to have a rationale for them. And so to the best of our ability to be fair, I had just raised that there has been questions about not so much the way in which we score, but why is it that that the score points are such, and so that might have actually just introduced some confusion to it that I didn't mean to do.
No, and all I'm suggesting is if we can't score that well, and if we're saying it's okay if you don't have 25%, then we take that score out. We don't need to have that score to come up with a total. I'm not saying it has to be there. I'm saying it's, I think if anybody doesn't have the 25%, then they should get 0 on that category. Or 1, whatever. If 1 is the lowest, they should get 1 or 0.
But for our charge tonight, we have what we have, right? We have the scores.
Yes.
We all tried to do what we could. So I think that might be for
well, in theory, we
discussion.
very well could redo them, and in certain limited ways have in the past. One of the strange things this year is that there really is no need to redo them because our scores are very similar. Kyle, your scores are almost exactly the average on all 5 agencies. They're extremely close to the average, whereas in the past, I think we've seen ranges of sometimes as high as 40 or 50, and so there was a need to have this introductory discussion where we ironed out why those ranges were so wide. One of the things that surprised me is that there really was no need for that this time. They were pretty close. I was just noting a couple of particular ambiguities in the question that might explain what little difference we did have, which is just that when an applicant falls into multiple median income ranges, how do we adjudicate between those scores? Do we give them the higher score, the lower score, or the average? I think there was an applicant that hit both 3150 and 5160, right? And so do we give them a 15? Do we give them a 10? Do we give them a 12 and a half, which I don't think anyone did, right? No one put a 0.5 in there. So,
that's where I think you're going to be consistent in your with yourself. You're going to score that. And I think as long as you have an answer to that, it's okay. You can justify to an applicant how you came up with that score. Then I think that's fine.
And then, just the other ambiguity being what counts as another financial resource. If we just had a brief description of that, that might help a little bit on that question.
I believe the city staff providing us the input may have been a factor in not having wide variations of the score. It was helpful. I didn't necessarily follow it, but I used it as a guide in helping me understand, I think.
I appreciated having the top line number, but not the actual breakdown on every question. I feel like that might have been a bit too much guidance.
Yeah.
If we had that. So So I kind of, like, personally, I'd like to see that in the future. I'm not going to be on the next commission that does this next year, but were I on that commission, I would like to see the same thing, just the big number, but not all that breakdown of every question.
Well, as just a point of process, I have a question for the city that submits applications, and then the city scores the application. Is the person who submits the application the same person that scores the application?
Yeah, we scored ourselves.
You do?
You guys are making the recommendation. So.
Well, I know, but then we got a memo saying that, we can't talk to the applicants.
Well, there's only 2 of us, so.
No, I mean that we can't talk to Chrissy or Simon or, So it just seems to me a little bit like you guys have an in, maybe.
Well, they do, but at one of the last meetings, I asked if they were okay if we didn't give them any money, and they said that was fine, so.
Okay,
I mean,
good.
reviewing a city application is a little intimidating in this process, but I wanted to make sure that you were okay with if I said, not that it's not a good project, but there were maybe some other projects that warranted more funding. So that's how I viewed it, so.
Do we have any, I don't know, anything to talk about with the rankings? I think it was unambiguous that Shelter House scored the highest. I mean, that seemed to be pretty clear from the rankings, so we get a little bit closer with some of the other applications.
Are the funding recommendations in I can't log in, so I can't get any of the stuff I had electronically. Do we have are the funding recommendations in the packet?
Our staff recommendations?
For the funding, yeah.
Yeah, I can pull them up.
Would it be out of the possibilities of technology to have your recommendations next to our scores?
The closest I have to that.
I don't know if I can see.
There's
I
staff
can't see that.
scores, and then I have your commissioner scores down here. And then I guess I created this so we could fill this out if we wanted to see what things might look like.
I can't see that even if my
Oh, sorry.
glasses on, so.
Does that help?
Not really. That's a little better.
The 78,000 recaptured CDBG that you guys had recommended given to Unlimited, is that from preschool?
Yep.
Thingy? Okay.
New creations.
Well, if we're moving on to discuss the funding recommendations, I have at least one question about the staff recommendation. I mean, we can look at this in absolute dollar amounts or percentage of requests, but if we start with absolute dollar amounts, then there is a pretty good correlation here between score and recommended allocation. The highest ranking applicant gets the most absolute dollar amount. For the most part, you go down from there. Obviously, if we look at it as percentage of request, it's very different, in some ways almost the opposite, though you give your reasons in the recommendation for that. I think what I'd like to hear more about is what's going on with the CHDO reserve. I mean, I understand the CHDO reserve. This is money that can only be spent, I believe, with the Housing Fellowship.
Right, that's what I understood, right? That's only their money. They're the only ones
Yeah.
that can get that money in the city because they're the only
Chodo.
provider currently under that
Chodo.
definition, right? So, okay.
But why is it also, why is it important enough that 80,000 of home funding goes to the lowest scoring applicant to justify that decision? I mean, if the commission were inclined to take the rankings very seriously and award that $80,000 to the top couple of scoring applicants, why would that not be the first choice? Yeah.
So we wanted to see a successful Chodo reserve activity, so we felt it was, even though they had a lower score, that it was important to set that project up to be successful. And so just because the Chodo is so important to the home allocation in general. And because Housing Fellowship is an experienced agency, and we feel that they'd be able to carry out the project.
On the same vein, I'm wondering why, if the shelter house gets such high score, why the city would only recommend half funding, half of the request.
So as Matt mentioned, we were kind of more looking at it as absolute dollars rather than percentage, and just looking at all the applications as well. So they got the highest allocation of all the requests.
I should know this because I've done this a couple times, but I don't remember. In times past, have there been projects that just simply were not funded?
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah?
Yeah.
I mean, I thought so, but I was like,
I got
I mean, so
some
it's going to Matt's question, sorry, and I'm sure that there's documentation that I didn't look at. But yeah, I guess, I mean, I certainly think that these projects all are worthy of funding, so it seems that too is part of the logic of what city was looking at when they were making recommendations for the dollar amounts. But yeah, it just sort of, it brings up the larger question that I think Matt was getting at too, of if we're going by those scores, then a score is one thing, but what matters is the amount of money, right? And so if there are projects do we have any guidelines in place, I guess, to think through how much, whether it's absolute dollar or percentage of very high scoring projects, are they weighted quite a bit more, or is this in fact here's where that subjectivity comes in of like, this particular round, these are all worthy projects, therefore to the extent that it's possible, we will fund them in accordance with the scores proportionally, but everyone will get some money. Whereas in some cases, the projects some of them are not worth it.
Well,
Does that make sense? I mean, it seems to me that this is the place where it is kind of actually circling back to something that Becky was talking about, like what can applicants expect? And on the one hand, we're working through painstakingly the scores, but then at the end of the day, what they want is the money, right, and the funding. And so do we need to have a similar conversation about applicants having an understanding of like, if you're underneath a certain score, then that's not funded. And I'm not necessarily in favor of that. I'm trying to take the logic of what can an applicant expect?
Well, we have one good thing that we could use. It would be the capacity history section of the rubric, which really gets to, if we see low scores there, I mean, that's really, there's some concerns there. The problem I had with it this time is that I gave every application a perfect score on that section. Like, I did not have any reservations at all with any of the applicants on that section. And if I had some reservations, I would say, well, then this application would be one we would consider not funding at all. It's just I gave them all perfect scores on this one, and I think most people did.
I really look at the readiness to proceed, because this is only my second meeting, and we've already recaptured funds for one project, and we're possibly doing another one. You know, right now you got Shelter House that you talk about shovel ready. They're already past that. We have applicants who have identified properties that they're ready to purchase. We have applicants that propose to acquire properties that haven't identified properties and haven't, well, for the city, the duplexes are still occupied. So, you don't really know. I mean, it wasn't clear to me that all of the projects are ready to go. And I think that's important.
Let me, I guess, I don't know, somewhat, I guess, be the bad guy. I don't know. I will say, first off, I thought staff's numbers were great. Reading the recommendation, I absolutely understand where our staff was coming from, but the minute I saw scores and the minute I saw the recaptured and I saw the note about the CHDO, I immediately was like, okay, Housing Fellowship's just going to get the CHDO. Like, that's the money they're getting. They got the lowest score. There's 77,000 that only they can use. They get it.
Oh, score.
Unlimited ability, CDBG, okay. Like, I think that's great. We were able to recapture it. We know that Unlimited Abilities does great work, but they have had some issues with getting houses, buying houses, and putting people in houses. They've had vacancy issues as well. Then I saw the 120 for City of Iowa City and Green State, and as I kind of mentioned earlier, I thought I have a little bit of an issue with the whole, we're going to give Green State money to give down payments to people who are then going to pay them for 30 years. It's just an issue with me, maybe, but it strikes me wrong. So I was like, I think 120 is too high. I would rather see a bigger chunk of that go towards just the City of Iowa City's down payment assistance. That is something that if we don't fund it is going to come out from other funding sources. It's going to come out from general fund. It's going to come out from, if we have home funding for that, I would rather see the money that's at the City of Iowa City and Green State and possibly the Housing Fellowship under home go towards the down payment assistance from the City of Iowa City, which is not a program I'm a huge fan of, for the record, but I think I think if it's something that it is a program the city is doing, it's in the third phase. It's not like this is something new. It's got to be completed. And then, as you mentioned, the shelter house over and over proves that they can do big projects, provide massive amounts of support to huge amounts of people, and they build. They put steel in the ground. They get rooms up. If it was me and we were filling that out, I would be 77 to CHDO, 78 unlimited, and then maybe 50 to City of Iowa City and Green State, fully fund 100 and put the rest to shelter house. That's where I would be.
You'd give 77 to unlimited?
I would give unlimited the 78 recaptured. Yeah.
I put them at 0. I actually don't want to give them anything.
If we're just looking at score, and we are going to say the scores are important, and we obviously all kind of fell on the same score line.
Unlimited was just as low as, the Housing
Unlimited's
Fellowship and
lower.
Unlimited were the two lowest.
I think give them 77 and let them match.
Well, here's how I see it. Actually, I think the Green State is a down payment assistance program. The City of Iowa City was actually purchase of a duplex in the South District. Am I correct?
It's also down payment assistance.
It's down payment
Okay.
assistance.
Specifically for the South District.
It targets different income level, and actually a chunk of the
goals as
score
well.
went to income levels, and so that's a huge difference. Shelter House got a huge score because they're in that lower income range, where Green State and City of Iowa City lost points in that section a little bit. Not that, I could argue both sides. I feel the same about Shelter House. I'm having a problem also with, they have the highest score. I think they scored on my own 98 or 99%.
99. I found myself very curious where they lost a point on your.
I thought their application was, excellent, to tell you the truth. So I can't remember where I took a point away. That might be what I searched for. But I too don't know how we come up with dividing the pot of money when we have one applicant that does really well. But I do think we have to take into account, where we want this money, how do we want to target this money. And I certainly think that It's just not the lowest income class, but there is a medium range. Down payments are hard for, working folks to come up with, and that's the beauty, I think, of the Green State program, is coming up with money that, can assist people in buying homes. So, but I don't have any suggestions about how to even begin to divide that pot of money up. I mean, Shelter House asked for $500,000, which was actually the entire. But, I don't disagree with that, because if, I used to lecture when I was an agency exec, we ask for what we need, not what we think we can get. So they demonstrated that they need it. I think we're saying, we can't give the whole pot of money to one organization, but how do we come up with, they did take, even in this recommendation, it took 50% of the original pot of money. So that'd be the lowest amount I would want to give to them.
What would be?
$250.
Yeah, me too.
The lowest amount.
The lowest amount, yes, for me, for Shelter House.
I would agree with that as well.
So throw 250 in there. So can we plug in numbers now, or?
Well, if we're doing the
Oh, wait.
exercise of what is the lowest amount you would give this agency, that would be, I suppose, our starting point.
Well, but that's the lowest amount, so I think that should be higher.
So do I, but I mean, we could start there.
I was going to say, we can tinker with it a little bit.
Oh, yeah.
I'm comfortable with the 250. I think that's more than.
And while we're starting with things that we could endorse, I was certainly convinced by the city's reasoning for giving the CHDO money, at the very least, to the Housing Fellowship.
I think it has to.
Oh, yeah.
It has to.
You have to do that.
I was going for uncontroversial there.
Not making waves yet.
I'm proposing 0 for unlimited abilities. That's my opinion.
I agree with that.
I think that if we are going to go the route of funding one agency 0, based on a combination of the scores plus other considerations, the CHDO considerations, this is the only application that we could really do it.
The Housing Fellowship scored low also. The difference is that they're proposing to rehab a 5 to 6 bedroom home. Do I have that right?
No.
Which,
There's no rehab, one house.
one house?
The difference is they've got money that only
No,
they can get.
but it's a
Larger house,
larger house. I think it is, and 5 or 6 bedrooms, is it not?
3 to 4.
Was it 3 to 4? Okay. But that's a little bit different niche for me. And at least the first meeting, I heard that that's one of the problems that we're having in our communities. We don't have enough of those homes. So that's a little bit of a different niche. So I would tend to pull Housing Fellowship up from the depths because of that one issue.
Do CDBG funds, is that 78, where does it go? Does it go back into a pot that we can then re-give out at the next funding?
Yes.
Yeah, I'm fine with that. I'm okay with, I don't disagree. I was thinking that it was something that had to be used, but I don't have a problem with holding off on giving them further funding right now until they, get their other issues with both vacancy and accounting issues cleaned up. Sorry, I was confused on that. I thought the 78,000 CDBG was a use it or lose it issue on this round.
No, we
No,
do.
okay.
We do have a timeliness test in May where we have to spend so much of our CDBG money, and obviously we didn't spend that money in time because of the Little Creations project not being done within a year. So it would help us out to spend that sooner than later, but since it's like a part of the whole program, it's not necessary, I guess.
Is the CDBG funds available to the non-legacy stuff?
I don't know.
Didn't we do some kind of mid-year round thing that had the smaller groups, the non-legacy
Those are emerging
Emerging
agencies.
That's the official title I was looking for.
No, this I think would be,
No, we can only use so many CDBG dollars for public services.
Okay, that's fine. I just didn't know if that was if that was an option at all, to be able to turn around and use that to fund some of the smaller groups like the emergency agencies that maybe we weren't able to fund the last time around, that we could request additional, but that's fine. If not, then no.
are there any applications here that are ineligible in your view for CDBG funds?
I don't think you can use CDBG on construction, right? I don't think you can do construction or rental housing. I think we've went around that before by like doing lot acquisition, but since this is already owned by Shelter House, I think that would be not a use of CDBG.
Be able to be used at City of Iowa City or the Green State, that could be used.
Yeah.
But you're saying we theoretically could just recapture it for now and use it in the next funding round? Okay, I'm fine with that.
I know, I think every meeting I ask about the Chodo money, so it's 77,000. I understand that goes to Housing Fellowship, and the only applicant that's eligible. You explained to me that HACAP is eligible for Chodo money also. But what is it to be used on? It's a certain amount of, I'm going to assume that's a certain percentage of the total dollars available, and
15%.
can it be used, so is it used for administration, or can be used for
No.
the project that they asked for?
It has to be used for affordable housing, so acquiring or rehab is typically what they would use it for.
Okay.
Operational expenses.
So when Housing Fellowship asked for, I can't see that very well. Did they ask for 150?
60, 160.
160. Did they know that some of that 160 would be Chodo dollars? Is that the way they look at it? Okay, that helps. By the end of the year, I'll understand what Chodo is completely, but it's going to take me a while.
Becky, we'll go out for coffee.
Okay, Marianne's she's going to educate me.
We'll go out for coffee.
I need that.
So, I mean, some of why I was asking about the CDBG funds in particular is if we did have a couple of people express desire to fund, not fund unlimited abilities. So the question would then be, would we move that CDBG money to one of the other 3 or 4 applications? And it sounds like we probably can't move it to Shelter House, at least insofar as that would be purely new construction, and I think not eligible for those funds. So I suppose we'd be looking at the 2 City of Iowa City applications. Or were you thinking you wanted to move those funds to one of those other 2 applications, or?
I don't know if you can. I don't know if it's an eligible expense for CDBG. Down payment assistance for homeownership, is it?
I think we can use CDBG for down payment assistance.
You can.
And I guess I would rather see that money move forward to the next round, just to see, I don't know.
Now you're talking
Once again,
about.
I'm just not excited about the whole down payment assistance programs that much, but if anything, I would rather fund the one that's coming straight out of city coffers than the one that's once again gets the back end, agreement with Green State as far as funding goes. But I mean, if you guys are more comfortable with going ahead and getting rid of that 78 and putting it towards, if that's the case, I'd rather put it to the City of Iowa City and fully fund that 100,000.
What 78 are you talking about, Kyle?
The 78 recapture that Matt was just talking, the CDBG. If it can be used for down payment, I'd rather it go towards the City of Iowa City South District program and just fully fund that and get it done.
In terms of the numbers that are listed here, it could do both.
Yeah, and I mean, on the one hand, I mean, I think that both programs actually have some value, apart from, I fully understand and kind of see where you're talking about. I mean, because it really goes to, I mean, that down payment is going for people who could be first-time homeowners. It's absolutely, it's geared towards black.
It's just a middle block.
Potential property owners, and that gap is so huge that I think that it's, I just wanted to put that out there as well, that.
If this commission decides to put that money there, I'm not going to not vote for it, is what I'm trying to say.
Gotcha.
I just don't want to be the one to make the motion.
No, and that's cool. I just sort of wanted to like interject and say that the merits of the program itself, it's not looking for the lowest AMI, and yet this is actually also attending to, a pretty stark statistical and lived experience of too many Black people being turned down for mortgages, and this helping them, gain equity and really create a legacy for families.
Right, and I do think it's important to keep in mind that I know I scored lower because of AMI or because of something that was particular to the project. But what I heard at one of the first two meetings is that we don't have enough housing for some of the larger families, and for me, the Housing Fellowship does fill a need there. So I am in support of even though they scored low, couldn't help it because that's how I was forced to score.
Do we know what the Housing Fellowship's current vacancy rate is?
I do not.
I mean, I figured someone in here would have the answer.
It's roughly 10% overall right now. That's largely being driven by the new light project from last year.
Yeah.
But our nonprofit entity, it is closer to 7.
I do have a question for the staff. Maybe you said this, I didn't catch it. What is the rationale for awarding funding to Housing Fellowship and giving nothing to Unlimited Abilities, even though they score higher than the Housing Fellowship? Or was it? I mean, I know this is a recommendation, but it's not final.
Yeah,
So we recommended the CDBG recapture funds for limited abilities. The additional funds for Housing Fellowship is because they're a CHODO, and so they're important to our overall home allocation. We're required to do so many CHODO projects, and this would allow them to carry that out.
I think Peter's question though is you did recommend 80,000 from home to housing, but $0 to unlimited abilities from home, and I think that's the question.
That's my question. Yes.
I was under the impression it was because of the fiscal year 21 issues and the accounting issues. That was, I guess, what I got from your staff report was that was the concern.
Has a lot more regulatory requirements, I guess, so we thought CDBG would be easier for them to administer.
If I remember rightly, that was actually a recommendation that you made last time as well.
I think so. I think that may have been before me, but I think I read that.
Yeah, their first project.
Yep.
That sounds right.
So I want to put up, no, back to the other one, actually. I want to put one possibility on the screen, not that I'm necessarily saying that we should vote on this right now or make a motion on it, but let's say we use staff recommendations with the exception that we took the 78,000 CDBG money and distributed it between the two City of Iowa City programs. What would that look like? Let's see. So we would have 100,000 for the South District program. So it would be 50,000 home funding and and the other 50,000 would be recaptured CDBG funds.
For the same project?
Right.
Yeah, it'd be, what, 89,000?
And then 120 from home. Yeah. And 28 from recaptured CDBG.
And then do we give the other 40 up to shelter, or do we go ahead and give 40 to Housing Fellowship, or 20 unlimited in Housing Fellowship?
Oh, wait.
It's 80.
I'm having a hard
80
time seeing
44, sorry.
this. So maybe
Would you
next,
like to come closer?
I probably would.
I can
At
give you
least-
my packet also.
Well, no, I've got my packet. I've got it printed. But, so, I already know the answer to if Green State doesn't get all of its money, it just hands out, it gives away less. So if we give them 100,000 instead of 150,000, I think they're going to do 10 down payment assists instead of 15. The Iowa City, though, what happens if that project is not fully funded?
So we typically would offer $25,000 per unit, and so if we could get funding in increments of 25,000, that would help us, do, if we got 50,000, we could do 2 units instead of 4. And they're duplexes, so they typically come in two at a time.
And how about the Housing Fellowship? Can I ask them? Or can I ask Simon that question? Is that okay?
That
Yeah.
seems fair. She asked it of you. Let's ask it of Simon as well.
It depends on if the 77 would be paid back or not. The other 80 we were envisioning as a loan that we would pay back to the fund. And we requested the other half be forgivable at the end of the period of affordability. So
Okay.
if that 77 was forgivable, we'd probably still move forward with it.
Okay.
Yeah, it'd just be tighter and probably bump up the rent a little bit. We have a lot of leeway in the rent that we projected in the pro forma.
Okay, good. I believe the shelter house, I just want to make sure that I have that right too. Shelter house, 500, the request for $500,
$500,000.
$500,000 goes to you'll get a bank loan. Probably not paraphrasing this very well. The request, any money that you get will help alleviate that so that your costs can, be spread to the program. You have less overhead costs going forward.
Just paying down debt.
So the question, if less than $500,000 for you isn't going to mean that the project won't move forward. Anything that you get is going to lower overhead costs. Is that correct?
Anything that we get, worst case scenario would be 0% loan, so it reduces the commercial debt, which now is at a 3.5%. So it would reduce that commercial debt that we're looking at right now. If it's a forgivable loan, then it reduces the debt overall, and then that's where that liberates money for the operating budget.
Okay, perfect. I just want to make sure that I knew if we were really, giving a program difficulty with less funding, so.
So it seems like we're trying to balance on the one hand respect for the rubric scores, on the other hand the maintaining of the city's home funding and status. To maybe finish out the visualization, let me have a more controversial proposal for the last 80,000. What if we straight split 40,000 apiece between Housing Fellowship and Shelter House? Let's at least see what that would look like. I didn't violate any rules here, did I? No, these are home funds. We can do that. Yeah. This is basically staff scores with 2 exceptions, one being the recaptured CDBG is moved from unlimited abilities to a split between the 2 City of Iowa City programs, and the other is that we fund Housing Fellowship at 117 rather than 157, and Shelter House a bit higher.
I don't like the 120 for Green Streets.
Mm-hmm.
I'd like to lower that to 100.
I support lowering that a bit too.
What was your proposal?
What?
What was your number proposal?
For Green Streets, 100,000. And then the rest, the 20 either to go to the Shelter House or the Housing Fellowship.
What's the Housing Fellowship at right now?
117.
17. Basically, the CHDO funds plus 40,000 home, which is about half of where it was from the city staff recommendation.
And what's the city at? Is that 50 or 90?
Where are you?
What's the number up there for the city of Iowa City?
50.
50? Okay. Feel like I'm at the.
So they asked for 100,000,
Right,
but
left,
Becky,
right, left.
they asked for 100,000 and they would get fully funded
Mhm.
because they get 50,000 of the recapture.
Which seemed reasonable in the sense that it's this second highest average score plus a relatively low overall.
So why don't you add
request.
10 to the housing fellowship and 10 to the shelter house? Split shelter house at 300.
Yeah, 53, yeah.
And what was the other one?
10 to the housing fellowship. Because that's going to be paid back, you guys.
That was the intent. That's what, yeah.
Which comes back into the home funds. I think that looks good for me.
It looks good for me, too.
And with, and Brianna, I mean, I'm assuming your Erica will, you know, obviously, Unlimited Abilities is more than happy to come back in the spring and hopefully have things cleaned up, and we'd be happy to consider a future request as well, but yeah, I think the concerns you had listed in the report are the concerns. So, yeah. I'm happy with it.
I move we adopt that.
Can I make a quick request? Could we adjust the city funding so that the South District is all home and then the other one is split between? It's a lot more administration to have two funding sources in a project, so if we could eliminate killing me, Kyle.
That's fine, Erica. That would be fine with me.
And then.
As a matter of fact, we're gonna make them weird numbers like 37,268 and the other one. I don't have a problem with that as long as that's not an issue.
That seems fine to me.
I think it'd be easiest to make that one all home
I think the city will be able to appropriately handle either CDBG or home and
So what,
either
doesn't
amount.
that change?
So 72,000, is there, no, 20-something thousand, right? 78.
Yeah, the full pot was
So
78.
22,000 will be home funding. Now, how do we mess that up?
No, it'd be,
Oh, yeah, that's right.
okay, I move,
You take the decimal places off the two that are in G only because they're the only one with double decimal places? Nothing. That one column's messing with my head.
I see it now.
Yes, thank you.
I'm happy with this. Do we?
I amend my motion to accept Erica's recommendation.
I second the motion to approve as presented.
So we have a motion and a second.
Yeah.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? And there we have it. So we'll move on to item 6, legacy agency request. It looks like what we have here is something that we've speculated on in various ways over the past few years, which is how does exactly an emerging agency emerge and move into a legacy status. It looks like we have a request to do so from Center for Worker Justice. This agenda item is a bit ambiguous. Are we deciding when to discuss it, or are we discussing it?
Yeah, we just wanted to get it on the calendar. November would probably work. I think we have a little bit of we weren't intending to discuss it, but we need to prepare until ahead of that meeting, so we just
So somebody from CWJ will be here, or
It is here.
they are here now? Oh, okay. So can we refresh the rules on the emerging agency? So is it, do they receive funds as an emerging agency for a specific number of times before they can be considered then for legacy agencies? Is that correct?
Not necessarily. Anyone can apply to be a legacy agency just with a written request to staff, and then it get reviewed by HCDC. But that requires the change would require a substantial amendment to our City Steps 5-year plan, and so we need to kind of plan ahead and start our public input process ahead of that meeting. We just want to be able to plan for that meeting to do all the necessary paperwork and public notices.
Okay. Erica, can I just make sure that I have that right? Anyone can request a staff to apply for that, essentially, but it takes a substantial amendment to the City Steps plan?
Yes, so we have all the legacy agencies listed in City Steps, and so if anyone else wanted to apply to be on that list, it needs to go through that amendment process.
Okay. And then are those instructions posted, documented anywhere? I just asked because I know that there is an agency that has wondered about this process and had no idea how to do it, and had looked, and so this is kind of welcome news that there is a way forward to request this, but I didn't know if this has been.
I believe it's briefly discussed in the City Steps, but I don't know how much detail it gets into.
Okay.
But you could send them to Brianna or I, and we could give them more information.
Okay, thanks.
I would find that helpful for the actual discussion if there are anything, if there's anything to put in the packet as in terms of guidelines and criteria for legacy status.
Is it required to list the agencies in the City Steps plan?
Yes. Though not by it's mostly local funding. It's some CDBG funding, but that's our processes. We specifically put it in the plan so that it would require the amendment to add additional agencies.
So when you call it.
So you could, in the City Steps, just say that the city does support a number of agencies under this, with their own money, basically.
Yeah,
With city money.
Whatever we
So-
wanted to do in the.
So if,
City Steps.
and if an agency wanted to become part of that, then you wouldn't have to change, you wouldn't have to amend the plan.
So when we did our City Steps plan, we deliberately made it, a process to add another agency because of the feedback we got when we did the 8-agency process. Because when you add another agency, the budget stays the same, and then the rest of the agencies get zero. So
The concern was without that, you would have yearly flips, more of an was that the concern is you would have more turmoil as far as?
The pot's smaller than for how much you can distribute
you'd have a
to
smaller
different
pie.
agencies.
As far as I'm concerned, if we add agencies to the legacy list, then we have to add funding. I'm not going to vote for anything that cuts the pie smaller, because that's exactly the hole we climbed out of a couple of years ago. And,
Although,
well, wait.
with that, I guess my statement is the one thing we do see right now heavily is very much just housing based. I mean, one of the things I am intrigued by the Center for Work and Justice is a legacy agency who's also looking for, I guess, alternate methods for community support.
That's not true. You've got free medical clinic, doesn't have anything to do with housing. It's a.
I guess I've never seen a legacy agency.
Yeah,
Are
you're.
there a free medical clinic is a
That's
legacy?
simply because sorry, I'm like
We just- I
bellowing.
didn't
No, it's remember we put the legacy agencies that didn't have to apply, so you haven't seen.
Oh, that's
Yeah, so it's just you haven't gone through the process, but yeah, there's plenty of agencies that don't address.
Okay.
But I absolutely will not support anything that doesn't, I think if we're going to add legacy agencies, then we have to add funding. Otherwise, we're back in the same boat that the agencies just crawled out of a couple of years ago. I just won't support anything that goes forward without it. One of the questions I had, And I'm sorry if I missed this, but when in the agenda it says it requires a substantial amendment, that term is just that it has to be amended, but I'm not taking that to mean substantial time from staff or anybody else. Is that correct?
Not necessarily. It just means that, so we have to follow our citizen participation plan.
Right.
And so it means there's a 30-day public comment period. We put
Right.
notices in the paper. We hold a public meeting.
That was my impression.
Meeting and at council. So.
So, so with that, I guess, why wouldn't the city have a process for this, for if there's other agencies that want to apply? Otherwise, we could get one of these requests every month, could we not?
Yeah.
So why don't we have a time of the year when we open it up and we can consider, I'd much rather consider multiple agencies rather than one at a time, to tell you the truth.
I think it's very rare for us to get such a request. It might be a long wait if we.
Well, we haven't had legacy agencies that long, though. You know, this all is new, all over the place. So, there are a couple of legacy agencies who haven't been funded from the city that long. They got funding, I want to say, in the last 6 or 7 years. I'm thinking of, what's the reentry program, the jail?
Oh, Inside Out.
Yeah, I want to say 6 or 7 years ago is when they first got funding. Otherwise, it was kind of hard to move in and out, basically because there wasn't any money, and the problem is the pie kept getting sliced into smaller pieces, which reduces then the amount of work. Well, actually, it doesn't reduce the work because the agencies have to do it, but it shifts the cost bearing to the agencies. So the agencies are bearing the load of the cost at doing these programs, and I just think we need to be firm about that. I think if we had an annual program or an annual time of the year when anybody could come forward with an application to become a legacy agency. Personally, I think that would be better, and then if we decided that there was reason to add one or two, then we could submit a request to council in addition to an increased funding at the same time. That would be my proposal.
If I remember right, there also does have to be sort of a track record of, of good agency, activity, right? I mean, so at the same time that I think there could be sort of this sense of open to people, one-time event type of thing, but I think that then becomes almost like a scoring process, right? But along with that, since the asks are pretty small, in fact, this is the first time I think that there's been something like this before us, and in a while at the very least. I don't know exactly what I'm saying. I just think it's interesting to think about, but as well, I don't know that we'll be flooded with a lot of them because emerging agencies, several of them, the ones that they really are simply starting up and just don't have a track record of actually being able to, they're not scaled up to become a legacy agency just yet. So I don't think that we'll see a whole lot of
So I have a question. So is the Center for Worker Justice now an emergency or an emergent, whatever that is, agency?
Even though they've been around for
Okay, so now they
long
just,
time, it's just the
okay.
funding.
I think the definition of emerging agency is just not a legacy agency, I think.
Oh,
Yeah.
But we have to, at this point though, they have applied, they put in a written request. The question from staff is, do we want to start that 30-day public comment process?
Right.
Or do we want to put it off? I mean,
so far,
if they put in the application under the current rules,
Right.
I don't know why we would put it off. I say we
Yeah.
put it on the agenda, start the public, start whatever it takes that we start, and if that's next month, we have the discussion, and that gives them 30 days to camp outside of Becky's house and try to change her mind, or the rest of us. But
don't
yeah.
say that. Oh my God.
At this point,
long as they mow the
the
lawn.
application is in. So
I do support Becky's idea that we should have a period, let's say every fall,
enrollment period.
enrollment period to invite all the agencies that are interested in becoming a legacy, if they feel like they meet the requirement for it, to come and apply. So that will avoid us taking this on case by case throughout the year. I think that's a good idea. I'm open to that.
Yeah, because I also would like to see this commission more active in at least communicating the needs, the financial needs of the organizations coming forward. That's just something on my hot button list, so.
I also support the idea of pairing admission of a new legacy agency with requests for more funding for the total pot.
We were successful in doing that a couple of years ago by, putting forth a recommendation to council and then asking to have, actually, I think it was a joint working session.
Yeah.
And we're able to present, the fact that there had been no increase to the budget over at least a decade, if not longer. So this could be the type of thing that we do on the regular in partnership with, saying that there are more agencies that want to be considered for legacy, that we would like to consider for legacy, but to your point that, by having more legacy agencies with the same budget isn't helpful, and that we would need to increase it. So, we could become stronger advocates in that way to council.
I think there's something for the top decision makers, and that's the city council, to know what the request is. If the request is twice as much money, because before the commission worked with us in the nonprofit groups and got more money, the city council didn't know. I was the one that went to budget meetings first Saturday of the new year. God forbid, it was cold early in the morning. But when I asked why they never, they had some discretionary money available, and not one idea was to spend that money with nonprofits, and they simply didn't know that there was a need because that hadn't been communicated. And that was a real lapse in responsibility for me, that I think that we should, along with this is what the agencies are getting, we should let them know, but this was what the request was for. I think it's helpful for them as leaders in our community to know that they're funding 50% of what agencies really need in terms of funding. So it might help our cause in getting more money to agencies and funding more agencies too. I'm not opposed to funding more agencies, but the money's got to come from, we've got to have additional money to do that.
To consider CWJ to be a legacy organization, I would love to see the record for the CWJ, how they were doing historically with the money fund. Do they have any issues in the past that with the funding? For example, last year I remember we recommend fund for the CWJ. What's the status of that project?
Yeah, it's an emerging aid to agency project. So we basically, it's for operational funds, and it's kind of on a schedule that we pay it out. It's not like a CDBG or home project where they'd have to accomplish something and then get reimbursed for the funding. But we can try to get maybe their reports for that project and provide that. We do have the written request. We didn't provide that because this agenda item wasn't intended to be the full discussion about whether they should become a legacy agency. But we can provide some history on the aid to agencies the past couple of years.
That would be helpful.
Their request and updates on projects, on what because they also received local funds for a COVID related project. I think they did emergency payments. Needed it during COVID, so we can provide information on that as well.
And it might make sense. If we're going to put it on the agenda with history of agency funding, to invite a representative from CWJ to answer questions.
I'm just confused about how this process is going to go, because we've not done this before. This is the first time. So if we do hear CWJ and say yes? Do we have more money? Say no because we don't have more money? I mean, what comes first? Do we have a commitment from city council to provide more funding for the pot for legacy agencies if we add more agencies?
Are there two different pots? Is there a pot for emerging and a pot for legacy?
Yeah.
Oh,
There's a carve out, right?
there's a carve out.
One pot, but 5% of the total funding amount can go to emerging agencies.
Okay.
And the funding increases by, is it 5% each year?
It's been 3% in recent
Okay.
years.
So that, it doesn't allow a vacuum of money that's, that can be, there's nothing that we can, the only way we could fund CWJ is to take funding from another agency.
Or there's periods, okay.
I believe under current rules, what would happen if we approved is that one legacy agency would be added and there would be no other changes. So yes, I mean, you'd be working with the same pot for one more agency.
So essentially.
Unless we asked for a change and received it.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying is,
different.
if this is the first time, how do we get this process right? I mean, if we add legacy agency or agencies, can we get a commitment from, for additional funding?
Well,
Well, the
We don't
budget
know
talks
that.
start in January, right? So, I mean, this is actually a fairly timely, we don't have a process for this. I mean, absolutely, you're right. We
We have a process for
But-
this.
Yeah, I mean, we have a
The
process to open
is
it up,
they
but in
apply,
terms
we
of,
discuss
Right.
it.
But we have no process for getting additional funds
Funds.
with the addition of a legacy agency
Right.
unless we ask council for one.
yeah,
but so far CWJ has followed the process as
as has been
is.
laid out.
Yeah, so I think,
It seems punishing to them. to
When-
not-
yeah, if they
When-
follow the process and we don't really have a process, then it's really not their fault. I mean,
Exactly.
they've done what they're supposed to do, so,
Right.
and I understand they may not have enough money, but it's like every other thing, really.
Well, what I'm
mean,
saying is this
United
is
Way
the
doesn't have
first
enough money
time,
either.
so I would just like to carve some sort of resemblance of a path.
That's fine, but it's not, but we are where we are because they did what they were supposed to do, as far as they knew
Well,
and as far as we know.
There's been no guidance up to this point, and that's what I'm trying to hammer out. So the new question that I have is with regard to the budget. When are departments, or if this group were to say, this is what we want in terms of a pot of money, when in the city calendar would we do that, to have that considered by city council?
So this request would actually, the first eligibility, because of our application cycle, they would be able to apply next fall, but they wouldn't be eligible until FY24 funding. And so right now, we're starting the budget process for FY23 funding, which is next July, so we're like almost 2 years out, under 2 years out. But, so we would have to make that request with next year's budget.
So then that would give us time to figure out the budget and hopefully increase it. So no agency would get less money. Possibly.
Not in FY23, though there's a chance that it could happen in FY24 if we did not at some point in the next year ask for and receive more money, right?
Where do we direct that request to? City council, or do we go to city manager?
Both.
Pardon?
Both.
Both? Okay. Can,
Also, the city council could take up its own initiative. Say, for example, if a new city council gets elected and yada yada, and they decide next year to take this up on their own. Not that I'm thinking of anyone in particular.
I mean, get me wrong, they could also take our recommendation to approve a new legacy agency and say, no, we're not gonna do it, correct? I mean, in the end, it's
Yeah.
council's decision. I mean, all we're making is a recommendation. I mean, and I would assume that even that, yeah, I mean.
well,
We're in a way kind of far afield. I mean, my sense is that they've they've requested this, and we should at some point put it on the agenda and consider it.
Yes.
If you're getting my gist, I like to see a path, and I'm trying to get to a path here. So can I suggest that Matt, as chairperson of the group, have a meeting? Megan, are you our vice chair?
Mm-hmm.
Maybe the chair and our vice chair have an initial conversation with the city manager? Because I don't think this has been talked about, adding legacy agencies and increasing the budget by more than what the annual increase is going to look at. I might also add just, having the commission communicate to the city about what the agency need is, what their request is, what we funded, and therefore what we weren't able to fund. Also, I think that those kinds of things are important for everybody to know. But that's what I would like to see is for us to go and at least get that initial question answered.
I think that makes a lot of sense.
Okay.
I think that's what V and Maria did. Chrissy can actually speak to it because I know you were involved actually at presenting at council. So, you're pretty intimately
It was my baby.
aware of how we managed to get before council to get the budget increase to begin with. So, we can talk to the city managers at the beginning, and then from there request to have a work session perhaps with council. And those are the steps I remember us taking before. A slightly different circumstance for what we were asking, but it was to point out that the budget needed to change, and that actually it came out of looking at funding and saying, and if I remember, you were there saying, this is ridiculous.
Yeah.
We're getting half of what we asked for, and we need every amount. And you're giving us the most that's in the budget. The budget isn't enough. And so that's what spurred the whole conversation. So I think that we take up that same perspective, but with the additional thing of now we have this process that is in there that hasn't really been taken up, but people are considering it now, of course, as need is greater, to say, how do we get more money, which is, let's move from emerging into legacy, but then we're stuck into that same kind of swirling pile of morass, to sound really poetic, where there's not enough money to help agencies. So we need to up it.
When you have this meeting, would it give you more ammunition, or whatever you want to say? I shouldn't use that word, but to say, we've had the request. The HCDC is recommending that CWJ become a legacy agency. And so then that will go to the council and everything. But then, so this is what's happened. How does the city manager recommend we go forward, and then how, we get to the city council? Does that make sense?
Yeah. I think it's just putting this request on the table in a responsible manner so that we don't have a lot of, we've said they can be a legacy agency, and how do they get funded?
Right.
I think we have to have some expectations that there's going to be some funding available. And for the record, I am not opposed to any agency asking to be a legacy agency.
Right.
It's just I want to make sure that there's the funding
It doesn't cut out others.
that doesn't cut others, yeah.
And just if we're thinking generally about how emerging agencies emerge, that should be part of the process. We
I think so,
we
too.
have this application process, and then we have the work session with the council to talk about increasing the pot.
To be honest, I'd prefer to see emerging agencies, in that role for a specified period of time, and then once they're, then they can go into the legacy agency. The difference is just the cutoff for emerging agencies is the top dollar's $15,000, and that's the bottom amount of funding for the legacy agencies. So that's the big difference.
And I think that'll probably come up also in the discussion next month. We'll have some interesting distinctions to draw, I think, between CWJ and then some of the other emerging agencies at the last round.
So do
So
we
let's do
need
that.
do we need to, I'm taking a page from Carl's book, and do we need to make a motion on this, or is it just that, yes, we would like to get this on for next?
I didn't think this
our next
required a
meeting?
motion, did it?
No, but I'm unclear on the.
Yeah, what's
order
the-
of events. Do you want this to be, do you want to review the request in November, or do you want to do the meetings first and?
I took us to be reviewing the request in November and then setting up the meetings, but if that's not what our understanding was, we should talk that out.
I'd actually like the meeting to happen regardless of, I think it's two
Oh, yeah.
separate issues, especially if there's other agencies that may want to become a legacy agency. I'd like this process to be a little bit more clear for me. So I would like to see the chair and vice chair of the commission meet initially with the city manager's office and talk this through. And I think if Center for Worker Justice is the idea that they would come to the November meeting and present to us, or what?
They have the written request we could provide you, and then if you guys have questions from there, I mean, they can present if they want, but if you guys have questions, they could be present to answer those.
Is there a standard format for the written request, or it's just a letter of interest?
There's a few specific things that I asked for when they reached out about it, but there's nothing formal about it.
So could we review that, and then we might, that would help me formulate some questions I might want to ask.
Yeah, we can provide that.
Okay.
So we're not doing anything with this tonight then? Okay.
So if you guys are ready to proceed in November, we'll start our kind of public input process for the substantial amendment for November.
So is that public input process here?
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, it's a 30-day public comment period, and it ends with the council meeting.
Okay.
But we usually schedule the HCDC meeting within that 30 days.
Okay. Good.
And then I suppose Megan and I will meet shortly and talk about the process for.
Yeah.
I think that's all we need on this item. Move on to number 7, Iowa City Council meeting updates. I think I have written that.
Me.
I think Becky. Yeah.
The meeting this week actually was on the Citizen Review Board for the police department, so I don't think there's anything other than one vote that related to the topic of the first meeting of October, which was form-based zoning. And that's, I might know a little bit more, but I could never talk about it, but it's a different way of zoning that's been proposed and voted upon by the city in council this week. And I called Brianna, I think it was last week, to just talk to her about this because there are supposed to be some benefits for affordable housing, but I couldn't discern that in the presentation that was made to city council, and in my limited Google search I couldn't either. So I thought it might be beneficial for the commission to have a presentation by staff on not exactly what was given to the city council, because there's a lot of charts and graphs and things like that, but I think on those kinds of issues that relate to us, on the benefits to a neighborhood, the benefits for affordable housing and such. And that's the only topic that I saw that might have had some relative interest to the commission.
I did sit on the September meeting and I missed the October, but I did offer to give my report to Brianna, and she was like, nah, you can just bring it up when you...
It would not be the same coming
Because the September meeting is kind of the same. There wasn't a lot. There was discussion about the Southgate changing Slumberland space, which, it's kind of a bummer to see more retail disappearing from the South District. But I mean, I think the Slumberland, or the storage, is, I guess, the best of the worst options as far as having an empty space versus having something there that will be usable by people who live in the area. Then the other question that came up was the council passed the vacation and conveyance of the right-of-way at the northeast corner of Lafayette and Dubuque, which was where Bill's used to be, for development by Gilbane Development to redevelop the entire block. So then it came to the question that immediately rose to my mind is, will this be in the downtown district and therefore not include the required affordable housing requirement? And I asked that because the developer discussed their affordable housing projects at the meeting. There was a line, but if you go to their website, they have literally an area for affordable housing on their website, and the link is blank. Like, you go to it, there is 0 actual affordable housing projects showing as completed on their website. Now, they have a bajillion awesome big rise latitude style student and mixed use development housing. So I was just curious, is that what's, I was just curious if this is just another, obviously large student oriented, and since it's in the downtown district or in that river district, I'm guessing it won't be, or downtown district won't be required to have the same affordable housing requirements that we have been discussing about and that we require elsewhere in the city. Do you know?
It is in riverfront crossings, and they're required to either provide 10% affordable or a fee in lieu.
Or in lieu, okay.
So,
and then I also got to listen to a 30-minute discussion on just speed bumps on a single street.
Friendship?
I think it went.
It was.
It was a long speed bump discussion, and then they were done at 9:13. So,
Trust me, I'm in favor
or against?
the gist of it was both in favor and against. I don't know that they even made a decision that night. Did they?
Yeah.
Okay.
And they're needed, trust me.
Okay.
So.
What street?
Friendship. They travel down there about 60 miles an hour on the
Oh, I hate those.
motorcycles and those crotch rockets.
I live on near Brown. Our solution to that is this street is in a state of disrepair.
Potholes. The opposite. Instead of bumps, we put holes in. Yeah.
Let's see. We'll go on to number 8, housing and community development information. I did see some packet items related to that.
Yeah, so our next meeting is going to be November 18th. That meeting will be approval of the FY23 application materials. We'll have some project monitoring presentations. And then I think on the calendar, we have a break plan for December. And like Matt said in the packet, Stephanie with our city offices sent out a potential training for board and commissioners. So if you're interested in that, definitely try that. I think it's via Zoom, so I may try to tune into that as well. Did you want to say anything about the public outreach?
yeah, so we included the results of recent city public outreach for affordable housing, just information sharing. It includes outreach that the city conducted for ARPA funding, as well as outreach done as part of the Affordable Housing Steering Committee efforts. So if you're interested, you can just read through those and see how people responded.
Can I ask a question? I've asked this before. Do we have any timeline on when ARPA funds are there's gonna be a decision made at the city?
For the city's allocation? I'm not sure.
Okay. And their use, what they're proposing. I've read a number of things about possible uses. I watched a presentation that city manager's office gave on their proposals, but I was just wondering, and how that fits into our calendar, because that would probably be a separate round of funding, correct?
Yes, so are you talking about the home funds?
I'm talking about the
Relief, American Relief.
yeah, the American Relief Funds.
So the city's getting a chunk of funds, and I don't expect that to come to this commission, but there are home funds that we've been allocated. And so when we're ready to I expect we'll do a competitive round for those funds, and that will come to the commission.
Is the home funds through ARPA?
Yes.
So is that the last thing I saw is there's under consideration is 1.5 to 2 million for nonprofit agencies.
That's part of the city's ARPA money, so there's kind of two separate pots of
Okay.
money. The bigger pot is the city has, and then we are also allocated about 1.8 million in home funds.
Okay.
And so that's what we expect will come to this commission at some point. I think it's several months out, because we have to come up with a plan.
Okay. I definitely need coffee and a lesson.
So I suppose we'll entertain any motion one might have for adjournment.
So moved.
Second.
Any objections?
Cool.